we basically had pretty much no change. Like the revenue was the same, the profitability, we were profitable. I mean, the profitability was the same. Like we weren't growing at all. And I had gone from 60 hours a week up to 80 to 100 was becoming the norm, and nothing was happening. And now I've got two of my best. They're talking about walking out on me, and I'm going like, I need help here.
Welcome to Escape the CEO Doom Loop, where we talk with real-world CEOs about the challenge of building a great business without losing your vision, energy, or sanity. I'm John Ninkovich, joined by my co-host and fellow business coach, Glenn Dahl. In addition,
That's me.
And in addition, we have Carl Saunders, the former CEO of Vorum. Hope I have that right, Carl. And now also a full-time Metronomics coach with Glenn and I, and as a part of our Metronomics coaching community. Welcome, Carl, to Escape the CEO Doom Loop.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Carl, it's great. Do you want to give us a little bit of a background, Carl, about yourself, what your company did?
With emphasis on a little bit, right? Because we could use the whole hour. So sure.
Yeah, brief background.
So I had a medical tech company the medical technology company called Vorum. We formed it in 1989 with funding from a Swedish entity that wanted basically automated design and manufacturing tools to make custom orthopedic product outside the body. So those would be spinal braces, for example, artificial limbs, custom footwear, insoles. The interesting thing about that was that every patient needs a unique device. And at the time, computer design manufacturing was all about spending time on design and making hundreds or thousands or millions of a particular part. And we were actually trying to use it to make one, right? Just one for each patient. So we started that in 89, and then fast forward over right through till just inside COVID, we sold the company. And we measured our impact by how often a patient was fitted with a custom device where our technology was the facilitator, right? So of course, when we started, it was brand new. There was nothing. And when we sold the company, it was once every 62 seconds, somewhere in the world, a patient was getting a custom device with our tech. So it was a wonderful run. I got to work with some fantastic people along the way. It was a bit of a case of, well, not a bit, it really was a case of if we build it, they will come. And so there was a lot of hurt around that, as you can imagine. So it was really slow in the beginning. The flip side of it is we became the standard for the industry, and the company is still going today. My personal background is I did an engineering physics degree, then a master's in biomedical, and then really a PhD in mistakes and trials of a CEO.
I love that. Can I steal that line, Carl?
Sure. It's all yours.
Yeah, excellent. All right. John, do you want to start off with our signature question?
Yeah, our opening signature question, Carl. So we always start here. Have you ever found yourself in the CEO Doom Loop? Tell us about the moment that you did, when you realized you were there, what was happening in the business when it hit, and what you needed to do or how you maneuvered around that when you realized that you were in the CEO Doom.
Yeah. So great intro question. I operated hugely from a fear of failure. You need to know that for me from the beginning. So I didn't take investment from other sources because I didn't want to have the potential to have to face that. So everything I did was either based on getting companies to say, yeah, we want that product, so we're going to pay for it, or, retain earnings or whatever. So I just give that as something that we can anchor on for some of the other questions too. If we think of that as my context, I'll go to, it would have been mid 2010s. So about 2 years before my partner that I'd had for 20 years had exited himself. So I bought him out. And so I'd run for about 2 years as both CEO and head of sales as well. And the numbers came in and it was like, gee, this is now the 4th year in a row where we basically had pretty much no change. The revenue was the same, plus or minus 10%. The profitability, we were profitable. I mean, the profitability was the same, plus or minus 5%, but we weren't growing at all. And I had gone from 60 hours a week up to, 80 to 100 was becoming the norm and nothing was happening. And so I'm kind of ruminating on that. And then in a span of, again, a few days, maybe even in the same week, I had two of my absolute top performers separately come into my office and go, "Hey, Carl, just want to touch base with you. You know what? Love what the company's doing. I'm wondering, where's the growth for me in this? I've been doing this with you for X years, and I just don't see any opportunity going forward, especially it doesn't look like the company's doing any better." And that happened twice in a span of a week. So here I am going
Wow.
like, holy crap, I'm already busting, not seeing any improvement. And now I've got two of my best. They're talking about, well, at the time, I'll say it, like walking out on me. It wasn't really that, but it's what it felt like. And I'm going like, I need help here. There is just nothing that is obvious to me what to do. So, and I think, I don't know that I characterized it as doom loop then. I didn't have that terminology, but in terms
Yes.
of characterizing a sense of doom, absolutely. That's where it felt like.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't think that we characterize it as doom either. We did this research project a couple of years ago. We interviewed 72 CEOs, and there were some themes that came out of it. And one was the doom loop. And I don't think we called it the doom loop. It was just this kind of place that CEOs were at a lot. We kind of came up with that when we kind of put it together. It was interesting. You talked about fear of failure. I was the same way. My question for you is, do you think when you have fear of failure, is this kind of, it's in you all the time, does that push you into the doom loop more frequently or more often? What's that look like for you?
Well, that's a great question. I think it left me as a founder much longer than it might have. I never doubted that anything that I had to deal with, I would solve. I never doubted that. Yet, if I had people around me that had to take on things and then it was, holy crap, we're heading into something bad, I would get elbows up or elbows in and go, "Hey, how's it going? What can we do? What can I do?" And, that sort of notion. So there was kind of a distortion there, right? Which is basically saying fear of failure motivated me and I knew it. As an individual, I could get there. I never doubted it. It was the question of, could I actually trust, in quotes, the people around me to also be able to do that? And so I kept myself hyper involved tactically, operationally in order to get through.
This is why when we discovered this concept of the doom loop, and I've used the analogy, John, I think you have too, of skiing, right? I still remember this a long time ago. I was over my skis, literally. And what did I do to try and ski down? I kept leaning back. When those things happen, we start leaning back. And what we do is we start leaning back into the business.
Totally.
And away from that leaning forward and being the true leader that everybody wants us to be, or people want us to be. And we basically start doing their jobs for them or pushing them out of the way, right? Like you said, and that's that fear of failure that tends to drive us. That is a counterproductive behavior, because then the great people who we should have hired, what do they start thinking? They start thinking like, "Oh, well, Carl doesn't trust me. I'm not good enough."
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had a question over here, Carl, also as a follow-up to that. So based on how you described it here, I'm kind of like, oh, you work 80, 100 hours a week, and these people kind of walking out and you seem to be taking it all in stride. How did you feel at that point in time, emotionally?
Well, that's a great question. For some reason, I treat it as a badge of honor. If you're running your own company, like, I'm doing 80 hours this week, I'm boss, man. This is good, So there was a perverse element of that was in there for sure. And then the other part of it, which was, and even today I smile at it. So when I was talking to my partner about our strategy, right? What's our strategy? Because he was years older than I was and had a ton more experience in the industry. And he goes, "Strategy, it's not complicated, Carl. It's really very simple." I go, "Well, can you bring me in?" But yeah, it's ride the tiger. Ride the tiger. That's what it's about. Absolutely. Whatever comes in, jump on, knees in tight, hands on the mane, ride that tiger. 80 to 100 hours is riding the tiger, man. This is the life. This is our strategy.
That's
Right.
great.
Wow.
So you mentioned something about thoughts about the doom loop, that you felt like you were a founder for too long and you kind of had to dive back in. Did that mean that you didn't have the right people? You weren't operating as a CEO? You weren't delegating effectively? What was it? Or you didn't have the right people to delegate to? What was it when you say you were the founder too long?
I think it ties into quite a bit of what we've been chatting about so far is just that for those 25 years, between me and my partner, we would make 90 to 95% of the decisions. That was how we rolled. And this notion of going back to finally realizing that 80 to 100 hours a week is not a badge of honor. It's a shit show. This is not sustainable at all. And so how the heck can I do this differently or better? Because this is not good. And through Shannon Susko and the Metronomics framework, she said, so your progression is going to be to go from 90 to 95% of decisions to less than 5.
Yeah.
Huge. That's great.
Right. And so for me, if I distill founder to CEO, that's what I would distill it on that one theme is how can you get to 5% of decision making or less and be confident. So that overriding, if you're anything like me, where you have this fear of failure in the back of the head, how the hell could you do that and be confident and sleep well at night and not be afraid?
That's great. Carl, how did you end up being a CEO?
So my father was an entrepreneur. So he started an aviation business. He did that in the early 70s and did as much as he could with the bank financing and stuff, then needed to take equity. And then when the financing market fell out, had to take more lock, and then down the road ended up being fired by the board and busted up our family. He moved to LA to be able to continue in aeronautics and all that stuff. So there's an entrepreneurship component that's just in my blood, knowing that I would have to do that. And the fear of failure comes from basically seeing the family get trashed, through that journey, right? So that kind of ties those two together. And then going back to my own individual thing, when I did finish university and decide I wanted to do something in medical and engineering, combine them, I found a group that was developing this product area that we were talking about earlier, automation in custom individual devices. And I joined them with the notion that I could have impact and that we could do something important. And once we showed the stuff internationally, people were nuts over it. They thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I was excited too. So I was charged. I talked to the various players in the industry to see if they would take it on, license it or whatever. And nobody would take it. It was just too early for everybody. And then so I approached the university and said, hey, look, will you give me a shot? So they decided to let me license the stuff myself and start a business above my garage because it's Canada and we don't start businesses in the garage in Canada. It's too cold.
So I'd like to go back a little bit to kind of this founder question again. And you started this process with Shannon. And I'd love for you to give that quote. You talked about you were a founder for, 22 years and CEO for 3. Can you kind of give us that quote?
Yeah, it was sort of like, I remember doing it at a trade show and I put my hands out on the podium and I said, I have a confession, the AA meetings, I said, what you need to know, I've been a founder for 25 years and a CEO for 2. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Can you break that down more? What did you mean by that?
So I guess in the notion of, again, just going back perhaps to that notion, I really felt that if I was in an environment where I'm making, between me and my partner, by far the majority of decisions, then everything it's a constrained funnel, right? Everything gets bogged down. So once embrace, the Metronomics framework where we're heading towards an environment, eyes and ears of the organization are not just me and my partner. The eyes and ears of the organization is everybody in the organization. So completely changing mindset. So that's key. Getting to a place where my fear of failure was so ingrained that at a town hall, I found out that the majority of people working in the company had a fear of failure. We are supposed to be an innovative company. Every town hall, which we held monthly, I would share, and what did I learn from it? And sure enough, over the, about 4 or 6 months along, the people started to share the same. What did they fail on? What did they learn? And what were we going to do differently? Right. And so to me, that's another, just a critical example of founder behavior is I live in fear. I just lock up. I don't share anything. CEO behavior is, hey, fear is normal, right? When you're trying to innovate, you're going to try stuff. Most important thing is if it fails, Share the learning. Where you really fail is if you don't have a learning and you don't share it, okay, then I'll buy it. That's a failure. But if you share a learning to everybody and raise everybody with a learning you have, whoa, that's a different game.
Yeah. I don't know if you can answer this, Carl, but as you said that, I love that founder behavior versus the CEO behavior, because you were in the seat, you were a CEO, you were coached. Now you're on the other side of that table, right? You're a coach working with CEOs. And what would you say are maybe the top 3 to 5 founder behaviors and the CEO behavior?
Great question, first of all. Go away from the notion of leading by project or activity, leading as a servant leader to people. When I think about in those founder years when things got tough or whatever, and I would jump in and put my elbows in, I wanted to know what could I be doing tactically, or what are you trying to do tactically, and how would I might adjust that? Whereas when I think of a servant leader model, in the servant leader model, you have the structure where you have weekly one-on-ones. The team member drives them, right? So the team member comes in and what is on their mind? The behavior is completely flipped from being, if I'm founder, for being focused on me and my fear, to actually saying, you own what's happening with you in your role. I'm here to support you. I need you to think about how I can support you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's a really interesting transition. Sometimes a hard one. So Carl, I run into this with companies that were founder led, started by, and really very successful. But as they get to a point where they realize, as they try to transition the business to the next generation of leadership, that's a really hard thing for them to kind of give that up, right? That kind of direction, making all the key decisions, being involved in everything, really evolving past that and being more of what I consider the conductor of the band or the conductor of the orchestra versus playing all the sections and then going up and conducting. That's a really hard transition. So was it the coaching that you got from Shannon and the Metronomics framework that was kind of the genesis of that evolution for you? Or were you starting to think that way before you actually started working on the coach?
Well, I think certainly the Metronomics framework and Shannon is a huge, huge part of it. What I see, interestingly, is the CEO, and you raised it really, John, the CEO has to have felt a tremendous amount of pain so that they will entertain. I use the word entertain intensely here, that they will consider changing how they interact.
I know you're a big fan of the William Bridges model of change, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. It is painful. It's difficult. And Marshall Goldsmith that said, what got you here won't get you there. And then Dr. Ben Hardy that added on to that said, it can very well keep you here. And so the model that you use, Carl, as a founder, which we see this a lot, got your company to a certain level. You gutted it out. You got there, right? But at a point in time, it wasn't working. In 4 years, you were just at that plateau, or really, which is really more of a valley of death.
Yes.
But you had to feel the pain before then you started asking for the cure.
Yeah. I guess when you were asking before about the aspects of founder versus CEO, right? You have to have the pain, and then you also have to create the space to allow yourself to grow into that. If you can do that, I put you in the CEO bracket. If as a founder, you look at things and go exactly what you said, Glenn, hey, we're doing pretty good.
So, Carl, do you think that you were coachable before you had this revelation or this pain and you were willing to go through the journey with Shannon and the Metronomics approach? Did you think of yourself as coachable, meaning, hey, there's things that I'm not great at that I got to really be open and honest to?
So great question. I was always interested in going out and learning about stuff where the company seemed to be having problems, right? So we seem to have a marketing problem. I go out and find a marketing seminar or marketing guru and do that, and then I whatever. And I'd bring that information back to the company. And by the third time I did that, I could see everyone in the company was going like, oh God, here he comes. What's he going to, what ideas are he going to have with now? Right. And it was basically goes, you come back with this idea on new, what are we going to do? What do we have to do? There isn't typically I couldn't come back with a how, and I certainly couldn't come back with how to integrate it into everything we were doing. So I had an openness to learning about stuff that I could see were problematic. I don't call that coachable. I just call that, just trying to keep my head above water effectively.
We're all coaches now. So let me just take that, Carl, that one step further. And John, you tell me if you see this or not. But what I see is when I'm starting with a new client, and they're like, they're all gung ho. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And then, oh my God, what's going wrong? We're doing all this stuff and no one wants to do it. And people are saying we're too corporate. They used to really like working here and they don't anymore. I'm like, well, let's break that down. Who are these people? And why are they saying this? They're like, oh, because they're the people who don't want to be accountable. And now you're putting scorecards in place with accountabilities. And now you're saying, hey, you're a C player, you're a B player. We need you to improve your performance. And there's a visibility in the company. There's a lot of things that have changed. And they're like, yeah, why doesn't everybody want to do that? That should be better. We're going to be a better company. So I thought, so they used the William Bridges model of that change. I'm like, yeah, you felt the pain and you decided you wanted to change. A lot of people in your company just liked it the way it was because there wasn't accountability, right? They could be comfortable in their job and whether they maybe didn't perform so well. And now you've changed the game, but they didn't opt into that.
That's a great point, a great observation. And certainly we had issues around that without a doubt. And it was all about, again, just trying to emphasize and we're trying to do better. Everybody could see that we had not been able to do better. That was one thing that everybody could see. And the second thing was, how the heck can we create some wins for everybody in the organization really quickly, right?
Okay.
Because remember that sort of there were the skeptics in there too, or the people downright didn't want to in your example, right? So that was where, once I got it figured out, the whole notion of the daily huddle and how the daily huddle would help everybody get unstuck quickly, would help people identify early if they needed help and would get help quickly. So just something as simple as that element right away and having that run for a while and having everybody sort of say, oh, geez, okay, well, thanks. I'm glad you were there to help me. Or this thing would normally stick around for 3 or 4 days. Instead, now it's getting solved today. Those were the places where we had wins initially that got a majority of people in the game.
All right. I remember you talking about this before, and I love this concept. Would you mind tell us about what you mean by daily huddle, and then what was that process you put into place to get those wins?
Yeah, so we had something, some people referred to it as a daily stand-up, but within each of the functional teams, the team members, they get together in the morning and they basically report on effectively 3 things, which was, what's your good news? What are you stuck on? And what's the one thing you're going to do today? And so the notion of that was, and again, because we had the Metronomics software tool, we also encouraged people to put that information in before the meeting, at least a half hour before.
Mm-hmm.
So what that did is it allowed all the participants in the meeting to go and see, and they said, oh man, I see Johnny's stuck with that particular customer. I was just talking to somebody in sales yesterday about them. And I think, so actually when we get to the meeting, I'll tell Johnny about that. And so that was that notion. And so everybody would do that. And then that would come back again the next morning and push through. Now, what was interesting is we had all the functional teams have their meetings one after the other because there was no requirement, but if you were interested, you could go and join any other functional teams meeting so that you could actually see what they're dealing with and perhaps contribute. And then the leadership team would meet last so that if there was something really hard that couldn't be solved within the functional team amongst those members, it would come to leadership, and leadership would then be able to chip in and help or advise on that particular issue. So the net result by doing that is you get issues surface very quickly and get dealt with very fast, so much faster than before we had that in place, that everybody starts to feel some momentum, right? We're like, whoa, now things are happening. Yeah. So that was the mechanics of that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So basically everybody in the company was on Metronome and everybody in the company were participating in daily huddles, and it was almost a cascade up, cascade down effect, so that any issues or what we call stucks would immediately bubble up and would get it resolved in real time.
That question you were asking me earlier about the 5 elements, I think one of the ones that I bring in for this is embrace transparency. Because as a founder, it would never in a million years occur to me to have all things and have that visible to everybody in the organization. That's just a non-starter. That is never would I have endorsed that behavior. As soon as we move into the CEO space and embrace transparency, where in fact everybody's priorities, their progress, including mine as CEO, is right there for everyone to see. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think about that because of the whole notion of the huddles as well, and how that just built this whole notion of, man, I can see what the CEO's doing. I can see what's happening in sales. I can see what's important to them. I can see how they're solving problems. I can see how now all of a sudden that transparency, again, it just creates this incredible energy driving the whole organization forward and going like, holy crap, Carl's comfortable enough to show me exactly what he's up to and what's going on. That's pretty cool. I'm fine to do it. If he is, then it's obviously fine. So
Yeah.
that notion of the CEO embracing transparency is so huge to building an organization.
So,
Well,
hey, Carl,
that's a
can we,
guy-
yeah,
very-
that's phenomenal. Can we go back to the huddle? So what you're saying is that you guys would do a huddle functionally. A leader of that function would be in that huddle, right? So accounting or sales or whatever. That's a 10 to 15-minute huddle. Then the leaders from that functional huddle, whoever ran that, right, would come to your leadership team huddle. And you'd have whatever, 6, 7, or 8 people in your leadership team huddle every day, right?
Right. Yeah.
And all together, how much time did that take for the whole organization to huddle?
So I think the first huddle started at 8:45 and we were done by 10:15.
8:45 to 10:15?
If I remember rightly. So there were 6 of them, bang, 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 bang. The other. And as we got going, I'd say by 3, 4 quarters in, it was pretty rare that we'd have something escalated to the leaders. Pretty rare. It would have to be
Wow.
pretty bad. Like just because they would, and they got excited about solving it themselves. It was cool.
So that goes back to your servant leadership as well, as they're not saying, oh, we need to elevate this up to Carl as CEO so he can decide what or tell us what we need to do. It was the inverse. The decisions were happening in those functional huddles after time.
And oftentimes, just for clarity, maybe not necessarily a decision, but somebody was identifying a resource that they could go to get a decision made. Wouldn't necessarily be there. Yeah.
All right. So, Carl, what was it that made you finally cross the chasm and engage a coach? And that coach was Shannon Susko. What was it that finally got you there?
One of the reasons I went to so many sessions was frankly because when I looked at the system, it seemed complicated. And so it's because it seemed complicated, it was kind of intimidating, or I wasn't sure that I got everything or whatever. And I think that was part of the reason. It seemed I was intrigued by the how. That's what really got me going, is that was all about how to do this as opposed to another speech on a what. And I had struggled previously. So at the end, the reason it was complicated was probably because it was hard to do. If it wasn't complicated, there would have been some other thing that would have solved it since then. The strongest thing for me goes back to the fact that she had actually used it and built a company from ground up very successfully and exited well. The fact that she had walked this talk was what pulled me in.
So, it was a combination of the Metronomics system and then Shannon, as a CEO, had actually played the game, executed her strategy, grew a company, and sold it. So it was a combination of both those things together that gave you the confidence that you want to use her as a coach.
Yeah, because she readily admitted that while she was trying to grow the first one, she just didn't have the how tools to get there. So in her first one, they were making it on the fly, right? So that was interesting, even that you would do that. And then by the second one, they had most of the how in place and they were actually able to implement it from the get-go.
Oh.
But the second company was in something ridiculous, 4 years or something, from 0 to 100 people. I mean, that was pretty amazing. So the fact that she had first built it out of necessity in the first one, that took a while, and then used it in the second one and boom. So that was impressive.
Yeah. Carl, what aspects of the system, then the coaching, even in the first year, what did you hate the most?
The thing I hated was setting the 3 HAG numbers. That was pure torture. I fought that for literally a couple of hours in the annual planning session, going like, what are you talking about? I ride the tiger. We don't know what the numbers are going to be in 30 days, let alone have me do 3 years out. That's ridiculous. And then one of the core values for me of my life is if I commit to something, I do it. Like I deliver on it. If you're asking me to commit to something 3 years out, are you crazy? I can't do that. It just, everything in my being is just, my stomach feels terrible. The back of my neck is tingling. There's a biological reaction to asking me to do this. So that's the part that I hated the most, without a doubt. And finally, the only thing that broke it open, I think her wording was something, just humor me or something. Let's just humor me and put something down, putting on a sticky note and slamming it against the wall or something, just out of pure frustration. So that was not pleasant.
Why did you decide, Kyle? Because you had a successful exit from your company, right?
Mhm.
And I'm assuming you really didn't have to go find another job,
No,
per se,
I don't know.
but you chose to become a Metronomics coach.
So yeah, so I guess part of it is that for whatever reason, my whole life I've been motivated by impact. I've always wanted to do something that's impactful. So after selling the business, the question was, what was I going to do next? When I look back on what had happened, literally, I'd had 4 years of busting my gut and working a banshee and done nothing. And then I had 4 years where we were implementing the system. We doubled our revenue. We tripled our profitability. And we got somebody to buy the company and only have me sign on for 6 months instead of 2 years, because they could look right back through the software and see how 4 years before I had a whole bunch of execution elements. And in the prior year, I had no execution responsibilities at all. They could see it all. So I just looked at that and thought, my God, this has had such an incredible impact on me, my family, and the business and all that stuff. I would love to have the opportunity to give that back to some other companies on a similar journey to my own. So that was the one.
That's great.
That's cool.
All right. Do you mind talking a little bit more about that part about the exit and about having the metronome software and having the acquiring company to be able to see the visibility? And basically, didn't they say something, you told me a story before, they're like, well, you're really not doing anything in the company.
Best part. So yeah, so that was
Tell us that story.
yeah. So the best part of that was, as we're working through the stuff, they basically said, just with all our acquisitions, there's a standard 2-year period that we want the CEO to stay in, the past CEO to stay in. And they go, so can we talk a little bit about that? So what's that based on? There's a lot, there's a whole transition. The CEO has their team and has to make sure that everything's working okay. And I said, well, what if I told you that actually the CEO wasn't, at the last year, hasn't really been doing much, and it's all the team that's been doing it. And what if I could actually show it to you and you could see exactly week by week what everybody in the team was doing for the last 12 quarters. And you could see the progression of my responsibilities to what they were in the last 3 quarters. And you could see that basically 0 execution responsibilities. And more importantly, you could see how the company executed better the less I was involved. So that was great, because gradually everybody in the company started to understand what it meant to be accountable and drive the company's success by being successful themselves. All of those things. There were way less reds as you went through from 4 years back to present, right? And so it was a powerful, it took all of about 10 minutes of me showing that through the tool. And they just sat there looking at it and they go, we don't have any other companies that we've acquired that has anything like this to show us how they do it, right? So yeah, then they basically looked at me and said, well, how long would you stay? And they said, well, how does 6 months sound? They said, done. So it was easy.
That is an amazing story.
That's a
That's
great
a
story.
super powerful story.
Yeah.
Like, who wouldn't want that?
Right? So, yeah, that's it.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Carl, I think you're aware that John and I collaborated and wrote something we call the CEO Playbook. We had interviews with 72 CEOs, did the analysis. That's where we came up with the doom loop concept. But then we said, well, okay, here are the things that CEO, what you can do to get out of the doom loop or avoid the doom loop. Carl, if you were contributing with us on the next edition of that, what are 3 things that you would tell a CEO they should do to avoid the CEO doom loop?
Going back to what we were talking about, is just make sure you know that 80 hours work a week is not a badge of honor. Quite the opposite. It should be screaming at you. You got a major symptom here of a problem. So then I would really go with some of the things we've talked about now is embrace changing yourself. I'm passionate about using the word embrace because it has to be. Like, you have to embrace it. It's not a toe dip, right? It's an embrace. And then kind of within that realm, it's really, second thing around the same theme is just dive into transparency. dive into transparency through the whole organization, include yourself in it and everybody else, so that you get this whole culture of, hey, we're all in this together and we can all see what each other's doing. If we see somebody's in trouble, we can jump over and help. It just changes it. It dramatically helps with it, reduce siloing and create a real spirit of team through the organization, which is huge on what you want to do there, I think. And then similar to what we discussed too, is this notion of implement with passion, this whole notion of one-on-one coaching from a servant leader perspective. So everybody in the organization feels that they're being supported. And so if they're being supported, then changes the dynamic. I'm not an athlete. My leader is holding me up. I'm not being directed down.
Super powerful. Yeah.
And Carl, I'm reading your lips. I think that you wanted to say number 4. If I'm reading it, I'm thinking if you had a fourth thing to say, it would be get a Metronomics coach.
How did you read that so dramatically well?
Wow.
I think you and I are like, we're on this thing.
Yeah. That's terrific. Yeah.
So I'll say this on the behalf of the 3 of us. So if anybody who may be out there listening to this podcast, who've hung in this far, and any of the things we've talked about for you as a founder or a CEO of your company, and you feel like, hey, you'd like to talk to someone about that and maybe think about what does coaching look like, feel free to reach out to any one of us, Glenn, John, or Carl, and we'd love to talk to you.
For sure.
All right.
Absolutely.
Great.
That was fun.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, guys.
That's great.